Alright, so next we're going to talk about the Spanish-American War. Alright, which takes place in April 20th of 1898 to December 10th of 1898. This was a global war that was fought physically in the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Alright, now the U.S. has always had an interest in Cuba. One of the things that happened was capitalists began investing millions of dollars in large sugarcane plantations. And so the American business owners urged the U.S. to intervene to protect American business interests in Cuba, because Jose Marti launched a revolution, a guerrilla campaign, and deliberately destroyed American-owned sugar mills and plantations. We also had the DeLone letter, which angered the American public because of its criticism of President McKinley as being weak, and it bitter for the admiration of the crowd. Alright, so yellow journalism is a sensationalist news reporting that's meant to sway public opinion. Hearst and Pulitzer have been trying to lure and enrage readers by writing exaggerated news, and they talked about the brutality of it, things like poison wells, children being thrown to sharks, all kinds of crazy stuff, and it deepened American sympathy for the rebels. So, yellow journalists are able to influence America's opinions on foreign policy by presenting an exaggerated version of the truth in order to manipulate the emotions of their readers. So, here's a political cartoon from Grant Hamilton called The Spanish Brute Adds Mutilation and Murder. You know, it kind of exaggerates how the Spanish are like an animal. You have a knife with blood of Americans on it. This takes place after the Maine was sunk. You notice the Maine murdered by Spain, so forth. Alright, so Remember the Maine was the slogan of the Spanish-American War. Actually, it was not just that, but it was Remember the Maine, and some added to Hell with Spain, which is actually has a nice rhyme to it, but hey, Remember the Maine is all you need to know. Alright, so it started where a few days after publication of the DeLone letter, American resentment towards Spain turned to outrage, and President McKinley ordered the United States USS Marine to Cuba to bring home American citizens in danger from the fighting and to protect American property. Well, on February 15, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in the harbor of Havana. Newspapers claimed the Spanish had blown up the ship, and this led McKinley to ask Congress to declare war. On April 20th, the United States declared war on Spain. Battles took place in the Philippine Islands. We have people like Commodore George Dewey, who destroyed the Spanish fleet at Manila within hours of the attack, and this helped show the superiority of the Navy. In 2 months, the Spanish surrendered to the United States. Alright, the War in the Caribbean. Hostilities began with a naval blockade of Cuba. The Navy was strong, the Army had a small professional force. The Army lacked supplies and good leaders. They included Civil War veterans who would rather recall their experiences instead of training the volunteers. Despite these handicaps, American forces landed at Cuba in June of 1898. Another problem that is not mentioned on here is that a lot of the soldiers wore these wool uniforms, and it was really hot in this tropical climate. 5,000 people died in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, but most of them, only a few hundred, were in actual combat. We have cavalry was probably the most famous group of fighters in the Spanish-American War. And one group was the Rough Riders, were a voluntary cavalry unit under the command of Teddy Roosevelt and Leonard Wood. They helped win San Juan Hill with the help of 2 other African-American regiments on horseback. And by victory, they found victory in Cuba, and then they began their invasion of Puerto Rico in July. But before they could get to Puerto Rico, the Spanish surrendered, and they agreed to a ceasefire on August 12th. Well, a few months later, they meet in Paris to discuss the delegate and discuss what's going to be in the treaty. So the fighting had only lasted actual 15 weeks. It freed Cuba from Spain, Guam and Puerto Rico were given to the United States, and the Philippines were sold to the United States for $20 million. Alright, the Spanish-American War. So this here just gives you a map of Spanish, the territories after the Spanish-American War and whatnot. Alright, let's look at Section 3. Now, ruling Puerto Rico. Not all Puerto Ricans wanted independence. Some wanted statehood, or they wanted their own American territory. But this is of strategic importance for maintaining a presence in the Caribbean and protecting what is going to be an eventual canal that's built across the country of Panama. In 1900, they passed the Foraker Act, and with the Foraker Act, the U.S. ended military rule in Puerto Rico and set up a civil government. When the U.S. declared war against Spain in 1898, it recognized Cuba's independence from Spain. We also have the Teller Amendment that basically said that there was no intention of taking over any part of Cuba. The Treaty of Paris had given them independence, but they were still occupied by troops after the war. In early 1900, the newly formed Cuban government writes a constitution for the independent Cuba. The Constitution did not specify the relationship between Cuba and the United States, but there was an amendment added that was called the Platt Amendment that specified the Cuban-American relationship. And it stated that the U.S. would not take out troops until the Platt Amendment was adopted. Cuba became a U.S. protectorate. And remember, a protectorate is a country whose affairs are partially controlled by a stronger power. Kind of like what Hawaii used to be. Alright, let's talk about the Philippines. Well, the Philippines was one of the country that they bought after the war. Well, the Philippines had been outraged at the Treaty of Paris. They thought the United States promised them independence. Well, in February of 1899, the Filipinos revolted. They were led by a man by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo, and he used guerrilla tactics. The United States took on the role the Spanish had forced Filipinos to live in. They designated zones where poor sanitation, starvation, and disease killed thousands. And so the United States will use the very same practice that Americans had condemned the Spanish for using in Cuba. Yeah, talk about irony. So it took Americans nearly 3 years to put down the rebellion. And after putting down the rebellion, a government similar to Puerto Rico was established, and it became an independent republic on July 4th, 1946, after World War II. We still have a large naval, I believe, from what I understand, we still have a large naval base there. Alright, foreign influence in China. Alright, many U.S. imperialists saw the Philippines as a gateway to the rest of Asia. They were concerned that China would be carved into colonies, and they would be shut out of American traders. So U.S. Secretary of State John Hay issued a series of policy statements in 1899. They were known as the Open Door Notes. Okay, they were messages that were sent to Germany, Russia, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan that proposed that countries share the trading rights with China. That way, no one would have a monopoly on any one part of China, and that became known as the Open Door Policy. But resentment by European dominance in China's large cities grew. The Chinese formed secret societies that pledged to rid the country of foreign devils. The Boxer Rebellion was a rebellion in which members of a Chinese secret society sought to free their country from Western influence. The Boxers killed hundreds of missionaries and other foreigners, as well as Chinese converts to Christianity. Alright, it was not a fun affair. Now, the Boxers, the reason they were called that was because of a style of martial arts that they did. Okay. So after the Boxer Rebellion, the United States feared that European nations would use their victory to take even greater control of China. So John Hay, the Secretary of State, is going to issue a second series of Open Door Notes. And in this one, he says that the United States would safeguard for the world the principle of equal and impartial trade with all parts of the Chinese Empire. One open door for more American influence in Asia. Alright, and this leads to 3 American beliefs about the U.S. industrialist capitalist economy. That the growth of the U.S. economy depended on exports. That the United States had the right to intervene abroad to keep foreign markets open. And that feared that closing of an area to American products, citizens, or ideas threatened United States survival. Okay. All right. And that is going to be the end of today's lesson. That is parts 2 and 3 from your notes.